Support for Amanpour comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Home plays a big role in your life. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully, so you can be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Amanpour.
Tonight from Singapore, the summit of the century is over, but is it one giant leap towards peace on the Korean peninsula or a risky gamble? I drill down into the details with top nuclear expert Jeffrey Lewis in California. Plus, my conversation with a man who's advised the South Korean president, Chung-in on President Trump's offer to end joint military exercises with Seoul. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Christiane Amanpour in Singapore. President Donald Trump and the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un have now departed after a whirlwind day filled with new images and perhaps even hope, and maybe even a new paradigm for the peninsula for the very first time in 70 years. But with few details available, experts are trying to determine exactly what was actually achieved beyond the headlines and the smiles. A historic handshake. For the first time, an American president meets the leader of North Korea. And later, they sign a joint declaration in which Kim Jong-un commits to work toward complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula.
Today, we had a historic meeting and decided to leave the past behind, and we are about to sign a historic document. The world will see a major change.
At a rare press conference, President Trump took a victory lap.
I will say this, we're much further along than I would have thought. I did not think we'd be here. I thought, and I've told people, I didn't want to build up people's hopes too much.
But the statement was relatively vague, similar to previous agreements with North Korea.
The joint statement does not talk about verifiable or irreversible denuclearization.
Yeah.
Is that a concession on the part of the United States?
No, not at all, because if you look at it, I mean, it said we are going to, let's say here, it will be gone. I don't think you can be any more plain than what we're asking.
And Trump announced what many see as a major concession right off the bat, saying that he would immediately call a halt to the joint military exercises, or war games as he called them, with South Korea, and even suggested U.S. troops could be pulled out.
I'd like to be able to bring them back home, but that's not part of the equation right now. At some point, I hope it will be, but not right now. We will be stopping the war games, which will save us a tremendous amount of money, unless and until we see that the future negotiation is not going along like it should. But we'll be saving a tremendous amount of money. Plus, I think it's very provocative.
Trump even gave Kim a look inside his presidential limousine, and he said he showed Kim a video that was crafted to lay out the economic gains that could come North Korea's way. And ever the real estate magnate, he added.
As an example, they have great beaches. You see that whenever they're exploding their cannons into the ocean, right? So I said, boy, look at that. Wouldn't that make a great condo behind?
Trump said that human rights came up only very briefly with Kim, and then he went on to praise him as a great negotiator. So what should we make of the outcome of this summit and the fact that the joint statement was so short on details about the crucial issue, denuclearization? Joining me now to discuss this from Monterey, California, is Jeffrey Lewis. He is the director of the East Asia Non-Proliferation Program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies there. And he's been warning for a long time that the first step towards peace is to lower our expectations. So, Jeffrey Lewis, welcome. Given that you're talking about lowering expectations, how do you analyze what happened after the joint communique? Was that better or not as good as you expected?
I didn't lower my expectations quite far enough. What the joint statement says on the issue that I care about, reducing the threat from North Korea's nuclear weapons, is really just a reaffirmation of the statement that Kim Jong-un made to President Moon. which uses this word denuclearization. And I think it's probably very important to say that that word denuclearization does not mean disarmament. And so I think that the two parties are as far apart as they have ever been.
Jeffrey Lewis, there has been a roundup, if you look on all the sort of instant analysis over the last several hours since this happened. There is quite a lot of skepticism about precisely that point and another point, which is the halting of the war games. But let me first press you on the denuclearization. The word was referred to a lot. President Trump kept saying that it will happen quickly. Leader Kim Jong-un has pledged that it will happen. I know it will happen. I know he wants to do it. But I think everyone is still confused as to what exactly each side means by that. And what is the difference between denuclearization and disarmament and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula as opposed to denuclearization of North Korea?
Well, I think that is the absolutely crucial point. The word denuclearization is a North Korean word. It's the word that the North Koreans chose back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when they didn't have nuclear weapons, but the United States did have them on the Korean Peninsula. So when the North Koreans talk about denuclearization, what they mean is a process by which relations are improved. And someday in the future, maybe, for example, like President Obama's Prague speech, we get to a world in which we won't need nuclear weapons anymore. So denuclearization is about putting improvement of relationship first and disarmament second, maybe never. The United States has always criticized that, arguing that what we want is disarmament and an actual dismantlement of the facilities. And the idea is we need to do that first, and then the relationship gets better. So you really have this fundamental difference of opinion about what is supposed to come first, the disarmament or the improvement of relations. And simply saying the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula doesn't really help us do much more than just paper over that.
Well, in terms of getting on the road to a better relationship, that seems to have been the big takeaway from this summit. Both leaders praised each other. You heard President Trump obviously very, very copiously praising and fully praising Leader Kim. And in his very brief comments, the North Korean leader talked about a historic change on the way. The past is behind us, and the world will see major change. If you were trying to figure out what that major change would be and the timeline, what do you think are the next steps? And is the ball now in North Korea's court?
Well, I think it's actually very unclear what the next steps are going to be. And part of this is a difference in what the United States is saying and what the United States is doing. What we're doing is denuclearization, which is to say we're putting improvements in the relationship first, and we're not really insisting that North Korea give any nuclear capabilities up. The problem is every time President Trump is asked about this, he says, oh, no, Kim will start very, very soon. So for me, the big question is going to be who takes the next step. I think it's very unlikely that Kim will do anything more than a few cosmetic steps toward disarmament. And so I think it will ultimately be up to the United States to continue the policy of finding things to give the North Koreans to keep them on their best behavior.
It sounds a lot like, you said finding things to keep giving the North Koreans. I think everybody was quite stunned by the president. It seemed like it was off the cuff. It was not in the declaration. They didn't sign it. To say that they are stopping the war games. We don't quite know what does that mean. Is it temporary? Is it a full stop? Is it the entire gamut of the military exercises? Is it not? We just don't know what it means. South Korea, at least the military there, seems to have been surprised by it, saying we need to get clarity on what that means. What do you think, having offered that, precisely means?
So I truly don't know what the president was getting at. The North Koreans have called for a reduction in the size and the scope of the exercises, and obviously they would like them all to be canceled. It's hard to imagine the military ever accepting the way the president framed it, which was who pays to practice. The answer to that is everyone pays to practice. The way that you build a capable and ready military is by doing exercises. I don't don't think anybody disagrees that we shouldn't consider changing the exercises so that they match the political relationship. And if things are going well, then of course, why do a provocative exercise? But the problem is that the president didn't say it in those moderate terms. What he did was issue a blanket condemnation of all military exercises. So it's hard for me to believe he meant it, but that's what he said.
And actually, others have pointed out that those military exercises are not just about protecting the allies and containing North Korea. They're also about a big signal to contain China as well and keep the United States relevant in that Asia-Pacific region. Is that part of it now in question? And I guess, since President Trump has always wanted to do this, do you think he's deliberately, this is not an accident what he said, he's deliberately setting up the future for a not just reduction in those games, but eventually pulling out the troops, as he said that he wanted to do?
Yes, this is one of these things that gets papered over in our kind of bipartisan discussions in Washington. There's usually a traditional view that the United States should be allied with South Korea, but there's always been a dissenting view. President Carter famously talked about pulling all U.S. troops out of South Korea. So, I think this idea that the United States should not be in South Korea, although it's really outside of what would typically be considered a mainstream discussion in D.C., I think it's something that President Trump sincerely believes. And so for him, it's not really a concession.
Jeffrey Lewis, it is clear that when one starts personal relationships, it often leads to the ability to change the dynamic politically. I mean, you just have to go back to Reagan and Gorbachev. The two of them did it together. It wasn't one or the other. And it led to eventually what we know what it led to. Are you willing to concede that that might be the case here? And a double-barreled question. The president keeps saying that he's the only one who could do this, that Kim Jong-un knows that he's the only one who could do this, that what he achieved in this summit, beyond just the meeting, was a much more robust, much more, determinative deal than any other U.S. president had achieved or had been able to do.
Well, I'll take the questions in the reverse order. As a factual matter, it's just not true that there's anything in this communique that hasn't been agreed to by the United States and North Korea dozens of times in the past. Whether it's the resumption of efforts to recover the remains of American servicemen killed in the Korean War, or whether it's North Korea's oft-repeated enthusiasm for denuclearization. In fact, when I look at that agreement, it could have been written in Pyongyang. But I will give the president this. He is the only person who could do this, but because his base simply does not care. I'm at the moment being bombarded on Twitter by people who are just unironically saying that North Korea has given up their nuclear weapons. And so I think it's easier for the president, given his base, to bring along a large group of people who would normally oppose something like this. So, there John Bolton sits, chewing on his mustache. To go back to Bill, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Well, actually, you just mentioned John Bolton, and you did actually tweet about John Bolton. Of course, he's the bête noire to the North Koreans, but he was very prominent. He was in the meetings. He was at the table. You could see him at one point talking to President Trump and even to Kim Jong-un, it looked like, when they were standing in a huddle. So he was there. But you have said, presumably, if Kim does not disarm, presumably that would empower hawkish officials like Bolton to call for a tougher stance. Do you worry about that? I mean, the question really is, what will happen if he doesn't go and do all the things that President Trump assured the world that he would do?
Well, so that goes back to the other question that I didn't end up answering, which is how much does personal rapport matter in a context like this? I think you are absolutely right that when two leaders share a common vision, then they have the political will to push past obstacles, and so that's a good thing. But the thing that worries me is we've seen that President Trump is, he changes his mind. In February 2017, Justin Trudeau came to the White House, and President Trump talked about how much he liked it. What then happened is, despite the personal rapport, there are real serious issues that at least are important to the president. He didn't get what he wanted in the G7 summit, and now things have collapsed in acrimony. I worry that the same thing may happen here. It's a lot of cheery bonhomie at the moment, but sooner or later it will be clear that Kim is not giving up the nuclear weapons, and then the question is, will Trump feel like he has been cheated?
Well, do you think the United States could live with a nuclear North Korea along with major, arms control agreements around it? Do you think that's how it might end up?
Well, I think the United States should live with a nuclear-armed North Korea. I would have preferred that we not get in this spot in the first place, but here we are. It's an interesting question whether we can. I mean, can we as a country accept that a particular foreign policy has failed and that we just have to take the world as it is? I think it's quite a hard thing to do, and politicians rarely are rewarded for telling people to eat their vegetables. But at the end of the day, yes, I think we need to take North Korea as it is, make the progress that we can, and, accept that there are some things that we will not be able to fix, at least not in the near term.
Really fascinating perspective. Thank you so much, Jeffrey Lewis from Monterey. And we're going to turn and ask that question now in South Korea, where there are mixed messages following today's summit. While President Moon Jae-in expressed his satisfaction with the outcome of the talks, his Defense Department was more cautious, saying that it needs to, quote, figure out President Trump's accurate meaning and intention about ending those joint military exercises. My next guest, Chung-in Moon, joins me now from Seoul with his own perspective on today's meetings. He is a distinguished professor at Yonsei University, and as a national security advisor to President Moon, he was in the room for the historic meeting with Kim Jong-un at the demilitarized zone back in April, that meeting that in fact led to the one that we've witnessed here in Singapore. So, Chung-in Moon, welcome to the program. And let me just ask you off the bat, do you think the world might have to live with a nuclear-armed North Korea under a rigorous and robust arms control regime?
No, I don't think so. We can still make North Korea give up its nuclear weapons. And I think that I still believe in hope in the negotiated settlement of North Korea's nuclear problem.
Dr. Moon, you heard what Jeffrey Lewis said, and you've seen the declaration for itself. And you are enough of an expert to know that it was not very detailed and that almost none of those points were any different than what North Korea has said to South Korea in the past, and indeed what North Korea has said to previous U.S. presidents. So where does your faith come? What is your actual technical reason for believing that they will disarm, denuclearize? In other words, let's put it simply, get rid of their nuclear weapons.
No, when President Moon Jae-in had in-depth discussion with the Chairman Kim Jong-un in Panmunjom on April 27, they talked about complete denuclearization. And we understand it is meant by the complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantling of North Korean nuclear materials, facilities, and weapons. And I understand that the Santora Declaration really reflects the extension of Panmunjom Declaration. Therefore, I understand President Trump, President Moon, and Chairman Kim, they all share the common understanding of CBID when they talk about complete denuclearization.
So just to get down into the weeds, many people believe that when the North Koreans say it, and when they add the words of the Korean Peninsula, that means not just them, but the whole sort of alliance. In other words, what the U.S. has, we know it's not based inside South Korea, but it's based on ships and on planes within range. Do you think, just to push you, that the North Koreans will disarm their own verifiably, irreversibly, and completely, or are they going to wait for a situation where it happens on the whole peninsula, with the U.S. included?
Not necessarily, because if you go back to 1992, both North and South Korea adopted the Declaration on the Denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. In accordance with the declaration, both North and South Korea are not supposed to manufacture, test, deploy, use, and transfer of nuclear weapons. Therefore, it is my understanding that when they talk about denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, they are really referring to the 1992 Declaration on the Denuclearization of Korea. Therefore, there is a full understanding on what is meant by denuclearization.
Okay, well, of course, they didn't have weapons at that time, and they do now. But can I ask you what you think your country is going to make of President Trump's announcement at the press conference? Again, it was not in the declaration, but that they would stop what he called the war games with South Korea.
Look, whether we have a joint military exercise and training or not is a decision by the alliance, not by leader of one country. Therefore, even the President of the United States cannot make a unilateral decision on whether to continue or not to continue the war game. It should be the result of a mutual consultation. Therefore, I don't worry about it. And eventually, President Trump will be talking with President Moon, and they will come up with a shared and common understanding. And to my understanding is this: when he talk about expensive nature of this joint military exercise, he's really referring to the deployment of strategic assets such as B-52 or B-2 bombers. Therefore, I would say that there would be continuation of allocated U.S. joint military exercise and training, maybe, but as a result of President Trump's remarks, they may not be the deployment of strategic assets. As a matter of fact, North Korea has been telling South Korea, if United States and South Korea do not deploy strategic assets, they are willing to tolerate our annual combined military exercise and training. Therefore, I understand in that way, not just suspending or stopping the war game.
Okay, so now let's flip it a little bit. Your president has called this historic. He praised both leaders, and many in the alliance have said, including in Europe, in Japan, and elsewhere, that this is a really important moment. So what do you think the steps will be going forward? For instance, in the declaration, the United States names Secretary of State Mike Pompeo as their chief negotiator. The North Koreans haven't named anybody. I mean, you'd think that they would have had the opportunity to think about it. These apparently were points that were drummed up way before the summit. Does that say anything to you? Why wouldn't they have named somebody to meet up with Secretary of State Pompeo?
No, it is quite understandable. Up until now, it was a rather ad hoc situation for North Korea. That is why Vice Chairman Kim Yong-chol was handling this issue. But once they get into the very specifics of nuclear negotiation, then people like Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho or Vice Chairman Lee Soo-yong, they should come to the front line. Therefore, North Korea may need time to discuss who should be dealing with Secretary Pompeo. That is why they didn't give a name. But eventually, Pyongyang will come up with very specific names. But it will be most likely that it will be foreign ministry-related guys rather than the Department of United Front of Korea Workers' Party.
And let me just ask you, you heard President Trump several times refer to Leader Kim, and he said he was a great personality, very smart, good combination, a very worthy, very smart negotiator, absolutely, very talented. He said absolutely sure that he actually wanted CVID, that acronym that we've been throwing around, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization and disarmament. What do you make of those words? You also have been in the room with Kim Jong-un. Do you see that he has a historic shift in attitude and direction?
Yeah, I think so. He has made fundamental change, or what we call a paradigm change in his way of conducting foreign policy. And also, it is very, very important for President Trump to cultivate personal dynamics with Chairman Kim Jong-un. Okay, when the Secretary Pompeo negotiate with his counterpart of North Korea. If things go wrong, then suppose President Trump make a phone call to Chairman Kim Jong-un, then they can fix all the problems. Look, North Korea is a country of one-man rule. It's a country of a monolithic leadership. Therefore, once Kim Jong-un makes decision, then things get be done. Therefore, in the sense that personal dynamics between the two leaders seems to be very, very important element in the future ventures.
And very briefly, we have 30 seconds. Is there anything that worries you? Are there any risks you see on the horizon?
No, I don't think so. It's just the beginning. Of course, the devil is in the details, but we understand North Korea quite well. Therefore, I think that we'll be able to overcome the current hurdles.
Dr. Chung-in, thank you so much for joining us from your national security perspective there in Seoul. And coming up, this historic summit was between North Korea and the U.S., of course. But is China a big winner? We'll ask the former U.S. ambassador to China about whose interests are best being served here. And are human rights taking a back seat? A North Korean defector who suffered under the Kim regime weighs in after a break.
Support for Amanpour comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. Rocket Mortgage is simple, allowing you to fully understand all the details and be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Amanpour. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, and MLSConsumerAccess.org number 3030. Been putting off buying new glasses? Zenni Optical offers a huge variety of high-quality, stylish frames and state-of-the-art optics, starting at just $6.95. We've got all the great frame styles you want in materials like titanium, carbon fiber, and high-luster acetate. Plus, Zenni offers prescription glasses and sunglasses. So at this great price, you can build your eyewear wardrobe. You can get 10% off your entire order with code 360. So visit Zenni, Zenni, today at zennioptical.com and use code 360.
Hey, it's Alicia Malone. I am the host of the Filmstruck podcast, an audio playground for lovers of cinema, both past and present. On the newest episode, I sit down with Morgan Neville to talk about his new film, Won't You Be My Neighbor, about the beloved television personality, Mr. Rogers.
Love is a noun like struggle. That these are things you have to fight for, and he fought for kindness.
Take tissues to see this movie and subscribe to hear more wherever you get your podcasts. Bye!
Welcome back to a special edition of Amanpour from Singapore with more of our coverage of today's historic summit. And we've just heard from a national security advisor to the South Korean president. And we turn now to what China, North Korea's biggest trading partner and diplomatic backer, might be making of all of this. Shortly after the summit wrapped up, the Chinese Foreign Ministry suggested that sanctions relief could be considered for North Korea. Now, Max Baucus served as U.S. ambassador to China from 2014 until Donald Trump's inauguration. And he joins me now from Washington. So, Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Everybody is saying that China could be the biggest winner out of that. Do you think that's too simplistic, or do you think that's accurate?
I think it's more accurate than not. First, the foreign minister issued a statement, the Chinese foreign minister, in favor of the agreement. Second, this is significantly close to what China's been asking for. China's been asking for the United States and North Korea to themselves work out a solution to the denuclearization of the peninsula and have advocated a freeze for freeze. This isn't exactly a freeze for freeze. That is a freeze on nuclear development on the one hand and freeze of U.S. Military activities with South Korea on the other. But it's close. China likes this. China sees Donald Trump as saying he'll reduce joint exercises in South Korea, something China very much wants. China would like to see the THAAD missile system taken out of South Korea. And if this proceeds the way everyone hopes it does, namely Kim gives up much of his nuclear capability, then it could well be that U.S. military presence is reduced. So that's what China's going to be working for. Let's remember, China is a non-transparent, autocratic, authoritarian country. So we're not going to really know all the deals that China is making with North Korea on the side, with South Korea on the side, Russia, other countries, as China tries to find an advantage here.
Mm-hmm. All of that, I understand exactly what you're saying. Do you think the Chinese not only want to see this nuclearization issue, solved, but they also would like to see the United States reduce its presence and maybe even leave the region? And by the same token, what do you think of that? In other words, what do you think of offering immediately to stop? We don't know the parameters or the conditions around President Trump's announcement that they would stop the war games. Yeah. Can you imagine what he might mean and what effect that might have long term?
Well, frankly, I'm very concerned because the United States under President Trump is, I think, too much of a America first, which is becoming a little bit America alone. President Trump withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, withdrew from the region, and China likes that. China's filling in the void, the vacuum, and who knows what President Trump and Chairman Kim talked about outside of the joint declaration. There could be a lot of promises there. We don't know. I think by and large, the United States comes out a little bit weak here. Kim's position is enhanced. And it's very important, I think, for the Congress, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to have very exhaustive hearings on this so we have a better idea of what U.S. policy is, especially because we have a president who makes decisions on the fly, doesn't really tell his advisors, doesn't tell his allies what he's doing, and it's very important that we keep our American eye on the ball, and hearings in the Senate and the House, but especially the Senate, will help.
So as a former U.S. ambassador and so, closely linked to, the U.S. national interest, obviously, I mean, what do you think is starting here? Some people have posited after the G7 summit that this could have been the beginning of the Trump administration's desire to sort of break the Western alliance, and that this summit could be the beginning of President Trump's desire to, as you've put it, act more unilaterally, pull back more, be a little bit more isolationist, particularly in this region. Beyond just the nitty-gritty of the summit, do you see a broader strategic foreign policy emerging from this administration?
I don't know if it's very strategic, but it does seem to me that President Trump likes to be a disruptor. He likes to disrupt, in some ways, the Western alliance. Look what he did in Ottawa at G7. He's a disruptor. He likes to throw a grenade and disrupt things. And he hopes, and he thinks, and he believes, and his advocates believe that, well, with the disruption, something good happens. He's doing a little bit of the same now with Kim and with North Korea. He's disrupting the usual diplomacy, and he's hoping that when the chips fall, that'll work out well to the United States' advantage. The trouble with that kind of a policy, I don't call it strategic, is that we're not sure where the chips are going to fall, and there's no plan B. There doesn't seem to be a coherent strategy how to deal with the pieces, to pick up the pieces afterwards. I just think it's dangerous, and that's why I think there's a real need for the press, for Congress and others to be very vigilant to make sure that American policy makes sense here.
I mean, I'm struck by what you said just when we started, that you feel that the U.S. came off a little weaker, the Kim regime came off a little stronger. Describe what you think the Kim regime and Kim Jong-un himself won, if that's how you put it, out of this meeting.
Yeah. Well, first of all, he's won in the sense he's developed nuclear and missile capability. He's achieved that. Second, he's won because he has this huge, big summit meeting with the American president. And third, by definition, with that, because he's now Kim more on the world stage, other countries are going to want to deal with him more as a co-equal, as a leader, and that's going to have all kinds of profound unintended consequences. One's going to be that sanctions are going to naturally begin to diminish, because it's hard to enforce these sanctions when we're dealing with a rogue hermit kingdom. He's no longer that. And so China's going to be more encouraged to engage in relaxation of sanctions, as probably will Russia. South Korea might also as well. So we're a little weaker. We're just not as strong as we once were. And especially when we have a president, in my judgment, I'm trying not to be political here, who's constantly changing his mind, who's making impulsive decisions. The ZTE decision is an example. He decided to do a deal with President Xi on ZTE, much to the, the advice of his advisors. Trump, thinking that that's going to enable him to curry favor with President Xi and to get a better deal. I see President Trump do a little of that here, saying, well, we'll cancel joint exercises, try to get something, but I don't know what we're going to get in return. It's like everything in life, basically. You do your best, but you don't know what's going to happen, and it all comes down to verification. It comes down to execution. It comes down to deeds, not words. So we just have to, in good faith, do the best we can and see what both sides do, so we can figure out a way to denuclearize the peninsula.
I must say, I think a lot of people absorbed that idea of good faith from the president during his press conference, because there was a lot of, when people ask him specifics about verifiable disarmament, about when the North Koreans would start their denuclearization process, he kept saying, well, they will. He told me they will. I believe him. They will. He wants to shift. But I also want to ask you about what you just said about sanctions and the normalization of Kim Jong-un and the regime. Obviously, the Chinese have already started, the foreign ministry, to say that sanctions relief should now be considered. You mentioned, of course, Russia believes the same thing. And Kim Jong-un has had the Russian foreign minister to Pyongyang, and there are all sorts of other invitations out to him to travel to other capitals. It seems to be the last bit of leverage left. Do you think that the president said sanctions would remain? I mean, is there any way after this that the president could go back to the fire and fury rhetoric, or do we have to rely on sanctions, and is that in itself an issue?
I think we cannot go back to fire and fury. I think the danger here is that we're not working more closely with our allies, that is with Japan, South Korea, et cetera, and even with China. There's no North Korean solution without the direct involvement of China, without China being a part of the solution here. We Americans have to work with all other countries in the region together and develop their trust. It's the only way we're going to make this work. It's a little bit subtle, but there's a really deep issue here, and that's this. The United States, as a democracy, is finding it difficult now to work with authoritarian governments like North Korea and China, which is non-transparent, no democracy there at all. We Americans assume the other side is going to deal in the same good faith as we like to think we deal in. They're not that way. They're transactional. They're results oriented. Less fairness is involved in their calculus. And this is a kind of example of how we as Americans, a democracy, who really believe so much in transparency and openness, can deal with a country that's not that way. And it comes really down to facts and just a coercive power in the best sense of the term. By that I mean being adults in the room, being direct, being honest, doing the best we can, but knowing the other side is going to be much more interested in results than it is in process and fairness.
Ambassador Max Baucus, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, President Trump would say that he's begun the process of establishing trust between the two leaders. We'll see where that does, in fact, lead. And he is touting the summit as a very great moment in the history of the world. It ended with a signed pledge, as we've said, that calls for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But the details, as we've already said, are vague. And my next guest can shed a little light about what might come next. He is Frank Lavin. He was deeply involved in the planning of U.S. arms control summits with the Soviet Union as President Reagan's political director. He also served as U.S. ambassador to Singapore under George W. Bush. And I spoke to him earlier about some of his thoughts on comparing this summit to the one he helped plan between the Soviet Union and the United States back in the 80s. Ambassador Lavin, welcome to the program. So this is obviously a historic meeting. Can you sum up whether anything major has been achieved? Is there lower than expected, higher than expected? What do you think?
I think the short answer is we don't know, because we just don't know if North Korea is going to perform or how they're going to perform. And even if Kim is 100% sincere, there might be problems in execution. This might take several years. So it's going to be a while before we really know, was this a good day or not?
Does it worry you that the statement, the declaration, was very similar to many that have been signed before with the United States, previous presidents, indeed with South Korea.
I would say this, that's a basis for skepticism. Any American ought to go into this agreement with eyes wide open to say, we've tried this before, at least twice, and it hasn't worked out. So have your eyes wide open. Now, there are some differences this time, one of which is that Kim's back is against the wall economically. That China has been engaged more than it has historically, so he is under economic pressure. The other interesting difference this time is at the same time the U.S. has been tougher than Kim than historically, the U.S. is being more kind and more gracious. That President Trump is talking about a White House visit. They're talking about really putting out the hand of friendship, and nobody's done that with Kim. So we might get a different outcome this time.
So you think that's a good thing?
Well, I would have advised the U.S. government to be less ambitious, less grandiose in its ambition, to say, can we come up with some steps that can be measured in the next 6 months that would validate whether or not Kim is serious about this or not. And after that process, we can go to more ambitious steps. And this administration said we're going to go for everything in one meeting.
How concerned are you that it appears out of the blue, certainly the South Koreans weren't prepared for this, that President Trump said they're stopping the joint exercises, stopping the war games, and using North Korean language to call them provocative?
Right. Look, I would say be very, very careful about dialing these things down. It's not a light switch. You can't just turn them on and off. There are people, relationship, process, institutions. If you degrade it, you're going to have enormous difficulty reinstating it, and I think the North knows that. So any deterioration is a victory for them. So be very careful. My advice to the U.S. government is let North Korea move first. Let them prove their bona fides first. Then the U.S. can respond in kind.
And just shortly, if you were the president of South Korea or the prime minister of Japan, what would you be thinking right now?
Well, I think what is called for now is enormous reassurance from the United States. The United States is not going to move precipitously. It's not going to move without consulting its allies. And I would send Pompeo to Seoul and to Tokyo. I think there is a talk about a three-way foreign minister meeting in someplace. So you need to have those kind of deep consultations with very close friends and allies in this process, so nobody's surprised.
So I'm fascinated. You were the organizer of the 1986 Reykjavik summit.
Yeah, I was on the planning team. I was on the planning
team?
Yeah.
Between President Reagan and the leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev.
Right.
That was a meeting that actually sent some shudders through the world because it did stumble, didn't it? It kind of failed.
It did. It's by some. The narrower you look at it, the more you take a negative view. The broader you look at it, you'd say kind of over the long run, it seemed to sort of work.
Well, tell me about that then, because the short run did look like it was a failure.
Well, there's one big parallel, I think, with today's meetings, which is you have two leaders meeting. And so there's an element of risk. Both Reagan and Gorbachev are exposing themselves. And there's also a little bit of an element of the unknown because the establishment on both sides aren't quite sure where these leaders are going to go. So that's similar today. I think the difference is this, that Reagan was prepared to walk away from the table. Reagan was prepared to say the deal is unacceptable and I'm going home. And you pay a cost if you do that. You pay a price if you do that. But unless you do that, you're not going to have integrity in your negotiations. If you're so wedded to the outcome, if you've already signaled that you must have something, then you're a prisoner of the other fellow.
So you think the Trump administration was so wedded to this meeting?
It's not clear. It's not clear. But he went in with very ambitious goals, and I said we normally would recommend against that. And did he fall in love with the process or fall in love with making history? We don't know. And I think we should give him the benefit of the doubt and say, look, this whole thing might work. We'll know in months to come and years to come. But let's take it step by step and let's have those eyes wide open.
Well, certainly everybody wants it to work. There's no doubt about it. For whatever reasons, maybe for a lot of different competing reasons. But let's go back to Reykjavik for a moment. Did that meeting sort of come out of the blue? It obviously wasn't the first time Reagan had sat down with Gorbachev. They actually had met before.
They met in Vienna,
and Geneva.
Right, that's correct.
And they also had their people.
Right. Oh, sure. Ministerial level discussions, staff level discussions ongoing.
So the Reykjavik was really well prepared?
There was. It was a culmination of, I would say, a 3 to 4 year process, right, of interaction. And this process in regarding Korea had gone on for only a few months. I mean, Pompeo did go to North Korea. There had been discussions in the UN. There had been other staff level discussions, but this was a rather accelerated process.
And from your experience, you know, Kim Jong-un didn't seem to say much beyond what he said already, reaffirming the commitment to denuclearization, not of North Korea, but of the Korean Peninsula. Again, that is Chinese, Russian, North Korean languages, not American language.
Right.
So
Yeah, he could be playing the same game he's played, but I'll tell you this, to argue Trump's point of view for a second, I think President Trump is completely correct when he's signaling to the North, you are never going to get a better deal than what I'm giving you. You are never going to get a friendlier U.S. president than what I'm giving you. So I'm giving you a way out. Your country is terrible economic straits. You're isolated politically. I'm willing to put out a hand of friendship to you. So if he's ever going to move, this is the time for Kim to move.
But what do you make of the concession we just talked about, the war games being stopped, and no movement on? I mean, they didn't even declare what nuclear arsenal they had, their missiles. They haven't done that.
Right. I would say to the U.S. side, don't. It's not up to the U.S. side to make the first move. It's really up to North Korea to make the first move and to prove so North Korea is the one that's operating out of sync with international law and has really painted itself in a corner. It's got to prove its integrity on these points. The U.S. doesn't have to prove anything to North Korea.
And the president did say sanctions will remain on.
Good for him, yeah.
So how easy is that going to be? You have a lot of experience with China as well. What is China sitting looking at? What will they have taken from the press conference, from the meeting today?
Well, there's a potential risk when you say sanctions are on but relations are warming. There's a potential risk because there can be leakage. And the integrity of these sanctions is hard to maintain. And you're right, a Chinese government probably is more or less trying to keep the sanction intact, but might not be enforcing the border as rigorously as they could. And there's leakage on that border, and people scurry around and do things. So watch out. You can expect some deterioration in the intensity of those sanctions, I think.
And the bigger picture, with China being probably all too happy to see the U.S. leave this area, and Donald Trump seems to have kind of put down the first chip in reducing, if not removing, America's presence.
I think China, on the one hand, probably is sympathetic to Trump's view of can we denuclearize North Korea. They don't view that as helpful. They don't view Kim's behavior as helpful. So they've probably got some sympathies for the U.S. position. But you're also right. They've got sympathies for Kim's solution to say, can we just reduce U.S. military footprint in the region? And anything that helps that along, China will support.
So if you were to look a couple of months down the line, where do you think this is headed? What are the sort of technicalities?
Well, if I were on the U.S. side, I would say, look, here's a 90-day map or 180-day map where we say we need to see these 10 steps unfold. We're going to be putting teams in North Korea. We're going to start doing surveys and tallings. We're going to be doing some of these inspections, but we need to see these steps unfold over the next 3 to 6 months, or we will come to the conclusion that you're not being honest with us, and this is a bit of a farce.
Fascinating. Ambassador Frank Levin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So amidst all the tricky nitty-gritty of politics and denuclearization timetables, human rights is also a major issue when it comes to North Korea. Indeed, a recent UN report said the Kim regime probably belongs in the International Criminal Court. President Trump says he broached the subject of human rights with the North Korean leader, but much like the nuclear issue, the president offered only a vague outline for future action. Take a listen.
We'll be doing something on it. It's rough. It's rough in a lot of places, by the way, not just there, but it's rough. And we will continue that, and I think ultimately we'll agree to something. But it was discussed at length outside of the nuclear situation, one of the primary topics.
There he was talking about human rights, and it is no small irony that this discussion on the subject, however brief, came on the same day that the United States is honoring a North Korean defector who endured some of the worst horrors of the regime. During the 1990s famine, Sung-ju Lee and his friends were forced to forage for squirrels because there was nothing else to eat. They were just kids. Lee wrote about his experiences in the book Every Falling Star, and he joined me earlier from Washington to talk about that and for his hopes after this summit. Sung-ju Lee, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
So you've been probably watching this summit, and maybe you heard Donald Trump say that the estimated 100,000 or so political prisoners or detainees are going to be the big winners in terms of human rights in North Korea. Do you think that this summit will affect the status of those in terrible conditions there?
This summit will not directly huge impact on resolving a human rights issue in North Korea, but it will because he also mentioned the next meeting, United States will talk about human rights inside of North Korea.
So, Sangju, you've written a book and you and your family have experienced the full weight of the human rights abuses there. Give me an idea, tell our viewers what your family went through.
Well, actually, when I was 12, my father went out of home for food to China. And then that time, North Korea had through a huge famine. So when I was 12, I became a street boy on the street because my father left home, also my mom left home. So I had to survive with my friends on the street for 4 years. During this period, I lost 2 friends. And then also I saw a dead body on the street. For example, I mean, during the night, we stay over a train station. During the day, we went to markets. But every night we pray for food. Because, I mean, in the morning, we woke up, there were dead bodies. So the police officers came to a train station and then they tried to clean the train station. So they forced us to clean the the train station. So we sometimes moved these dead bodies to a certain place. So after that, we got some bread. So we pray for that. Next morning, we will see more dead bodies at the train station. That was our prayer.
Sangju, obviously you're talking about the 1990s when there was a terrible famine and maybe up to 2 million people died of starvation. Thankfully, that isn't the case right now. What do you think, and are you in touch with people inside North Korea? How are they living? What do you think they're thinking about their future after a summit like this one?
This must be a huge impact on regular people because regular people has been brainwashed for decades on that United States are a sworn enemy of North Korea. So, but Kim Jong-un now met Donald Trump. So this must has huge impact on regular people in North Korea.
North Korea is saying that it made everybody see Kim Jong-un as an equal, as a statesman, and that was the point of the summit. Were you pleased to see this summit happen?
But 6 months ago, both the presidents talked about war, right? But now they're talking about peace. And also, this North Korean people can access this information later on. So these people might think that United States will be our friends in the future, not enemy anymore.
And what did you think, and I wonder what the people of North Korea thought, seeing Kim Jong-un here in Singapore? He was walking around, he did what we call a walkabout late last night. He took selfies, he was smiling. I mean, a very different kind of Kim Jong-un than we've seen him in the past. What were your impressions of that?
Again, 6 months ago, I mean, Kim Jong-un, he was kind of the leader of the war. But now he tried to change his image as more peaceful man. So North Korea is not kind of a warrior state. It's just kind of peaceful state. So he tried to make some kind of that kind of image. But North Korean people cannot watch his selfie, definitely, because North Korean government control those kind of images of Kim Jong-un.
Do you think this is a moment of change, or is it the leader of North Korea getting the most he can out of the U.S.?
Well, it's in my personal opinion, Kim Jong-un has a dilemma because if he pursues nuclear weapons, his country will face huge economic kind of depression. So he might choose that whether having nuclear weapon is a good thing or bad thing to kind of maintaining his regime. So for me, well, they're just saying that in North Korea, every North Korean knows that wolf cannot be a sheep. So a person cannot be changed easily because Kim Jong-un lived 34 years like that. Kind of, he knows the word, he knows the power. So, well, hopefully, I hope that Kim Jong-un should change, but I'm very skeptical on that.
Well, I think everybody is going to hope that the wolf becomes more sheep-like. But let me ask you, you've also said that you would hope one day, your dream one day, is to return home. Do you feel that today may have been the first step in the possibility of a North Korea where you, a defector, could safely return home?
Well, I hope that it is a huge step for me to see the unification on the Korean Peninsula. But it will take time because in the North Korean perspective, North Korean defectors are betrayers. So it's really hard to, if there's unification, we can go to home. But before that, it'll be really difficult to go home.
Sung-Ju Lee, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for our summit special tonight. News and views from every perspective and on all issues. Thanks for watching and goodbye from Singapore.
Hey, before you go, we wanted to let you know that we just launched the ability for anyone to advertise on CNN podcasts. You're just a few clicks away from reaching millions of people in a way that you never have before. Advertise for a business, event, or kick off an awareness campaign for your brand. Start today at purewinning.com/CNN. Integrating podcasts into your marketing mix has never been easier. Go to purewinning.com/CNN to get started.